Hey everyone, welcome to today's Monday Morning Minute. It's Monday, September 28th. I hope you all had a nice weekend. For today, we're just going to be recapping last week's readings, thinking about developing positive peer relationships. We'll then preview this week's readings, looking at developing positive relationships with families and communities. We'll talk about critical response number 3, and then I just have a brief friendly reminder for us all. So thinking back to last week, we read a couple of pieces, one of which was by Thomas Jackson, thinking about P4C, philosophy for children, and this idea of not being in a rush. And that seemed to resonate with a lot of us across the different small groups. And I've just pulled out a couple of really interesting ideas I wanted to share with you all. So the first comes from Steph, who writes, "We are in such a rush at times, especially during a school day, that we do not take the time to really open our eyes and ears to children, at times even our hearts." This article really showed how fostering positive peer relationships among students is crucial and goes hand in hand with a safe classroom culture. Absolutely, Steph. I can't think of a more succinct way to phrase that, right? So thinking about, within this problematic term of classroom management, we're really taking a focus in this course thinking about classroom culture, thinking about classroom community, and understanding that that's kind of the bedrock. That's the foundation for learning. It's not something added on, right? Learning needs to start from that very safe, that intellectually safe space. So thank you, Steph, for bringing our attention to that. And Lexi wrote, "If we are teaching simply for the short haul, an answer-driven system may be the way to go. However, education is lifelong. We are in it for the long haul. An answer-driven system does not spark curiosity and engagement. If we want these things, we need to transition our systems to being question-based, where students are yearning to find out more." And this reminded me a lot of something that Dr. Jackson, Dr. J, would often say, which is that too often our students enter schooling as question marks, right? They're filled with questions and wonderings and whys. And when they leave school, they are periods. Just kind of, yup, right? That inner fire, that inner thirst for knowledge and curiosity about the world is taken out of them, right? And the difference is that they've been educated. They've been educated in that time period. So what would it mean if we thought about our role as fostering that curiosity, fostering that inquiry? And I know some of us mentioned that it was helpful that this P4C approach gave us maybe some concrete ways to actually utilize inquiry within our classrooms. And to that end, I'll link within this Monday Morning Minute announcement, just a handout that goes through that Good Thinkers Toolkit. It can be super helpful, especially because students, as they go through schooling, are far less used to actually asking questions. They're much more used to just finding answers, right? This answer-driven system that Lexi talks about. So it's just a handout, goes through those 7 Good Thinkers tools with some sentence frames that are really helpful. And I've used them with 7th and 8th graders. It can just be kind of helpful to get into that inquiry mindset and to dig deeper into questions that hopefully you and your students are co-inquirers about. So thank you all so much for your participation last week. Okay, so this week, we've gone from thinking, 2 weeks ago about building relationships with your students, right? Teacher and student. Last week we talked about peer relationships. Now we're kind of expanding out and thinking about how to build relationships with our students' families, with their caregivers, with the broader community. And I think this is something that can be especially fraught for new teachers. I know it was for me in my first couple of years. And it wasn't until I had this realization that families weren't the enemy, which is kind of how they were positioned at the school that I was working at. And in fact, families were on the same team as me, right? We're all in this trying to help the student, trying to support the student in any way that they need. And once that realization took hold, it was like night and day. And I found myself, even as a new teacher, and feeling a little inexperienced and young, from that vantage point of like, we're on the same team, it was so much easier to call parents because it was a problem solving call. It wasn't a so-and-so did this today. It was like, hey, I've noticed this about your student. What can we do? What's going on? And that, man, that just opened up so many doors. And so I encourage you all to kind of go into the classroom with that mindset that we're on the same team. And I love this quote from Joyce Epstein. She's a sociologist of education. She's at Johns Hopkins University. And she says, the way schools care about children is reflected in the way schools care about the children's families. And I think that's so wise. And so I'm going to ask you about this during the critical response this week, but I do want you to start to think carefully and critically about your own experiences in schools, but also the one that you're having right now in the field. How do your mentor teachers, how do administrators interact with students' families? Again, as I said, the school that I started off at, we did as much as we could to avoid interacting with families. And because the thought was that they're going to come in and they're going to question our methods and they're going to get upset, et cetera, et cetera. And what I love about this Joyce Epstein quote is that she's saying, we can't really care about the whole child. We can't say in one breath that we fully love our children and care for them if we don't fully love and care for our students' families as well. And I think that's such a perspective shift. So this week we have two pieces to look at. The first comes from Teaching Tolerance. And I don't know if you're familiar with Teaching Tolerance. It's a really fantastic website. I know tolerance is kind of a problematic word, but they do a lot of good work with anti-bias education. And so we're going to look at their suggestions for family and community engagement. And here they're just looking at how to inclusively weave in the knowledge, the rich knowledge that your students' families and the broader community has. How can we tap into that for educative purposes? And this goes hand in hand with this concept that we'll be looking at in more depth in a few weeks, but it's this idea of funds of knowledge. So often, and very problematically, when we have students come into our classroom and perhaps they are minoritized in some way, whether that's ethno-racially or linguistically or in terms of gender or religion, etc., it's really easy to approach students with a deficit mindset in terms of, so thinking about that difference as a deficit, as a problem. And in fact, as Monty Mullen Gonzalez famously wrote in 1995, no, right? Every single student is bringing in funds of knowledge, tremendous funds of knowledge. They are not empty vessels, right? And I think that this teaching tolerance piece takes that idea of funds of knowledge and is really looking at the community as a wealth of knowledge that we can use for our students, for the betterment of their education. And I'm going to actually navigate to that page just really quickly so you know what it looks like. Okay, so here it is. And again, in this series of critical practices for anti-bias education, they have a whole lot of suggestions. We're looking at just the family and community engagement resources. So they're all contained within this one page, but I do want to make sure that you take a look, and read through this entire web page here. And for every critical practice, they have several strategies, as you can see, that they suggest. And we're going to loop back to these strategies for the critical response this week. So again, just reading through down to the bottom. You're welcome, of course, to check out other critical practices and other sections of this website, but for our purposes this week, this is where our focus is. Okay. All right, so the other piece of media that I'm asking you to engage with, it's a really short clip. It's 2 minutes. It's Victoria Purcell Gates, who does a lot of work with family community outreach and education. And it's just part of an interview with her in which she's talking about how important it is to involve families. And also she's giving some suggestions for kind of best practices when it comes to involving families. She has a really harsh critique of this common practice where we're trying to bring parents and community members in rather than ourselves going out. So again, 2 minutes, she says a lot of really wise things that I think flow beautifully with this larger theme that we're looking at. Okay, so this week, critical response number 3, here's what I'm asking us to reflect on. First of all, I'd love to know, what have you observed in your field experience with regard to fostering family and community relationships? Now, on one hand, maybe not a lot, right? Because this is kind of a semester of triage for all of us, for all of you, for all of the faculty members, for the teachers that you're working with and the administrators. So I understand if you haven't seen a whole lot. That said, because of COVID, my hunch is that in some ways, family members, caregivers are even more involved now than they were previously, right? Because some of them are at home facilitating, maybe listening in on the lessons that you all are observing. So I'd be interested to hear what you're observing to that end. And then secondly, how might you employ one or more strategies presented in this week's readings in order to engage families and communities in their students' education? So here I'm just asking you, thinking about that teaching tolerance and to a lesser extent that video clip, what are some strategies that you could see yourself implementing? I think that's a helpful place for us to start. So the initial post is due Thursday per usual, and 2 follow-ups are due the following Sunday, the 4th of October. Can't believe we're already in October. Wild. And then it's just a quick reminder that I have for you all. As I've been saying, right, this is a wild semester. It is triage. This is not the semester that any of us wanted. This is not the year that any of us wanted, most likely. And I know that things are tough, really tough. And I just want to encourage you, because I know some of us, maybe most of us, maybe all of us, are high achievers, and I can see that in your work already, and are super committed to this program and to this work. And for that reason, it might be hard to ask for an extension or to ask a clarifying question or to say, hey, like, I can't get it done. When's an acceptable time for me to turn this in? And I just want to emphasize that I am here to support you all. I am happy to work with you no matter what the situation is. And also, you don't have to tell me the situation. That's totally fine. But I'm here and we'll make it work. We're going to get through this semester together. We will make it through together. All right. So you all can lean on me, and I'll do my best to make sure that you're able to finish, that you're able to get the work done. We'll meet the situation however we need to. So thank you all so much for listening. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves this week, and I'll see you back here next week.